Good morning, everybody. Core Use Bloody History. So, the past week or so, I have been assembling this document book, which it'll be an official release on Amazon and all that stuff. It's called Lee Harvey Oswald in Black and White, Volume 1. If everything goes as I think it will, it should be around 250 pages. Mostly documents, some photographs with explanations of what they are. And I'm taking a rather different approach to this. There's a lot of things I want to say in this book that I don't think I'm going to. I have a lot of speculation that I can't figure out, and it's too early to really publish anything with my speculation. And my speculation is specifically on whether or not Marguerite Oswald had moved to New York around 1941. Pulling the hairs out of my head trying to figure this thing out. 1942 is the biggest problem year that I have. 1942 is the first year that Marguerite Oswald goes back to work, right? So Lee Oswald, his father dies in August 39. Lee's born in October 39. Robert Oswald had left Marguerite $5,000 in a life insurance policy, which she lived on, along with child support from Ed Pick. And what else? She had some rental property income from the Alvar properties. She had all this money coming in. She had money. But yet we're told she's, impoverished and destitute and, poor me is her whole attitude, it seems. And so 1942 rolls around and we have some major conflicting information on 1942. 1942, Marguerite Oswald allegedly worked very briefly for Jean's Hosiery and then went to go work for, I believe it's Princess Hosiery, which is owned by the Lady Orris Hosiery Company in New York. She doesn't do a good job. She's fired after 2 months. She starts in July. She's fired in September. And when the FBI goes to them to pull the documents, they find at Jean's Hosiery a woman who worked there from July to September named Marguerite Rombach. So this is brand new to me. I need to do some major digging into this because I don't understand the relationships between the hosiery companies and the owner of the hosiery companies. There's some obfuscation here. I believe that Lady Orris owned Lady Orris Hosiery and Princess Hosiery. But Jean's Hosiery, I think, was owned by somebody else. You see, I'm not really sure. This is what I need to dig into. And I hate stumbling upon new things when I'm putting together a book, right? So in the book writing process, you have a kind of train of thought, right? And you start writing, and you'll get through your train of thought, and you'll get to a point where you have a fact, and you need to document that fact, and you need to reference that, right? And so as you're writing, you're on this train of thought. You need to stop what you're doing, put that aside, and then go and look specifically into the details of the thing that you're using in your train of thought, right? So you're constantly stopping the writing process to go back and do secondary, what I call secondary research. Your primary research is already done, right? This is secondary research, meaning you're just going back and you're re-researching the stuff you already did. But then when you stumble across something new, it totally sidetracks you. And you got to try to fit it into your train of thought. And if you can't fit it into your train of thought, you at least need to acknowledge this thing exists that you can't fit into your train of thought, right? I did that in the first book with the Roger Craig stuff, right? Like, I know there's no way there were 3 shells under the fucking window, but he said there were 3 shells, even though he wasn't the first one there. And there were other people there handling them before he gets there. And then when people started to show up again, the shells were repositioned. They were staged. The photographs we've seen were staged, okay? They were picked up and handled as soon as they fucking got there and then put back. So, and I feel like he's totally full of shit on fucking 3 shells, because I can't prove 3 shells, and I have more evidence that there were only 2 shells under the window, not 3. But then I come to depend heavily on his statements regarding William Seymour, and as he saw Oswald run down the hill and get into the Green Rambler and all that stuff, which was owned by Lawrence Howard. So if you can't fit something into your main train of thought from your secondary research, you got to at least acknowledge it in the book, right? And so here I'm kind of at I hit this like pothole by discovering this Marguerite Rombach, and now I have to take a couple of days. Hopefully I can knock it out in a day and figure out where she fits into this. I already pulled her obituary and all that stuff. Totally innocuous, right? Really nothing outstanding about her whatsoever. No military connections, nothing like that. So it might be absolutely nothing. But in the researching process, you find yourself going down a lot of dead ends. You have to. It's part of the process. But 1942 for me and Marguerite Oswald is fucked up, because this is where you get into... Fuck, I might as well pull up some of the stuff I'm doing now. This is where you get into Marguerite Oswald and her conflicting work schedule. Was she working at a hosiery shop? Was she working for the Navy? Or was she working for the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company? Because you don't get a job with the Navy at a naval base for part-time or for a couple months. No, that's a commitment. And so I have here Marguerite Oswald's page, and I'm citing this in the book. I have this page from her book, A Mother in History. And remember, the woman who was involved with Jean Stafford, who wrote A Mother in History, was the false Marguerite. Right? With the glasses, the mole under the eye, the whole 9 yards. So I always wonder how she comes up with some of her stories. Are they her life stories, or are they the real Marguerite's life stories? And was she coached on these? And how was she coached on these? Was she given detailed information? Did that would indicate maybe Marguerite had to have kept some kind of journal or diary as to what she did that could be studied? So this is where a lot of the confusion comes into play, and this is where I give props to the intelligence agencies for pulling this off to the degree they did. Because let's think about this for a second. I believe Marguerite Oswald went to New York. We have those 2 addresses that are unverifiable, 2136 Broadway and 227 Atlantic Avenue. They check out in New York, though. And it turns out, according to John Armstrong's notes, I have to double check where he got this, but he found that she only lived at 2136 Broadway for 3 weeks, right? When they went and interviewed the people who lived at 2136 Broadway. And that would be, where is it? Here we go. So I'll read you this page from my new book that I'm writing. I'm talking about 1942. I say, during this time period of mid-1942 onward, investigators discovered via Marguerite's credit report that she lived at 2 addresses. And it was from a later credit report. The earlier credit reports have a gap. The New Orleans-based one has a gap. But the later national credit report had these 2 addresses. And the copy that I have has the addresses for all the places she lived, including these 2, but it doesn't say the city, right? It doesn't say the city. And so I don't know if that's part of the confusion over this or what the deal is, but let me continue. One of the addresses was 2136 Broadway in New Orleans, and the other was 227 Atlantic Avenue in Algiers, Louisiana. Neither of these addresses check out. So they went and interviewed Lily R. Fuerst, Fuerst. And she and her mother, Mrs. Ephraim Rosenberg, that they had resided at 2136 Broadway for a period of 11 years and left there after the lease expired on September 30th, 1942. So you'd think that that would leave some room for there to be, for her to have lived there after September of 1942. But no, that's not the case either. I'll read this from an FBI report. Mr. Albrecht stated that when he moved to that address, 2136 Broadway was occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Rosenberg and their daughter, and Mr. and Mrs. Jack Daboob, or Dabdoob, D-A-B-D-O-U-B. And they resided at this location to the best of his recollection. A Mr. Harold Lamb resided there after that for a few years. Turns out Mr. Harold Lamb, L-A-M-M, he moved in on October the 1st. And he was there for a couple years. So 2136 Broadway makes no sense for it to be in New Orleans. And I wonder how they came to understand it was in New Orleans itself. When I saw this, because I remembered the credit report that didn't have the city, it just had the address itself, the street address, I wondered if that's what they saw and then just assumed it was New Orleans. But that ends up not being the case. Let me see if I have this here. So I have Commission's Exhibit number 2213. It's an FBI report. They speak with Edward Eiser, A-I-Z-E-R. I don't know how to say that. We'll call him Eiser, maybe Edward Eiser, owner, Lady Oris Hosiery, 443 Park Avenue South, New York, New York, advised S.A. James Ingram on December 9th, 1963. His records show an employee withholding certificate dated July 9th, 1943 in the name of Marguerite Frances Oswald, 2136 Broadway, New Orleans, with Social Security number 435225686. The certificate was signed by Mrs. Marguerite Oswald, and the certificate indicated she had 3 dependents as of July 9th, 1943. So she was there in 43, allegedly. Eiser stated he opened a hosiery store in New Orleans in July 43, and he hired Mrs. Oswald as manager of the small store. So that's good. Good to know. Clarifies that a little bit. John Armstrong had in his notes that she worked at Bert's shoe store in 1942. That's what I was thinking. So Bert's shoe store, it's funny because she works at the company that owns Bert's. She ends up working for them like 3 different times. And she was fired like the first 2 times, right? She gets fired all the time because she's a real cold, bitchy person, So why would this company hire her multiple times and then fire her? It doesn't make any sense to me. And let me see. This is July 43, and the home office of the company is in New York. This leads me to believe this could be another situation like with Oswald and all of his jobs that he had post-62 when he came back. I don't know about Leslie Welding. I still need to look into Leslie Welding. But all the other jobs had intelligence connections, right? Riley Coffee, which was Standard Coffee, employed 3 different Oswalds. None of them allegedly knew each other. Weird, right? That guy who owned that was former CIA. 4 of the guys who worked there went on to go work in the aerospace industry. Interesting, huh? Almost like those were no-show jobs, which is what I'm pretty sure most of Oswald's jobs were. I'm pretty sure most of his jobs were no-show jobs, like the book depository. Where I promise you he was not there November 22nd, and he couldn't have been there previous because the person who they were working with, they would know if Oswald was suddenly a different person only on the day of the assassination, right? So, obviously he couldn't have been there on any of the days. It had to have been Seymour the entire time because nothing else makes sense. So I got to wonder if Marguerite Oswald's jobs, all of them that she had, which were short-lived, just like Oswald, he moved from place to place to place all over throughout his whole life. Did he just learn that from his mother, or was there a reason for that? But his life followed a pattern in her life, constantly moving addresses, constantly moving jobs. And don't even get me started on the whole where'd she become a nurse aspect of this whole thing. But this era, up until they move into the Victor Street property in April of 1944, nobody can confirm anything that Marguerite says. And that time period is riddled with lies and contradiction. When the FBI interview her directly about that, she tells them that she lived at the Bartholomew Street address until she moved into Victor Street in April 44, which is crazy because she moved out of Bartholomew January 42. Well, she moved out in October, but the house was sold in January of 42. She probably stayed with her sister. Every time she's between places, she just stays with her sister, I'm confident. But then her sister lies about that during the Warren Commission, which is fucked up too. So Bert Shue in 1942, the U.S. Navy and the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. And then there was something else, I think, at the end of 42. This doesn't make any sense. Nobody joins the Navy for like 3 months. You know what I mean? When you look at the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company in 1940, they got a big military contract, and they made all kinds of glass, like you name it, from consumer glass to industrial glass. They were glass people. And 1940, they decided to put a lot of money and time and company emphasis into their partnerships with the Air Force, where they developed glass for airplanes. Super duper top secret. Defense contractor stuff. And they were not operating in New Orleans area at the time. They will have a place in Shreveport. I found that they had a manufacturing plant in Shreveport, and the pictures I see look old, but I can't tell from what era they are. Maybe the 60s, maybe the 50s. I don't know. I'd have to verify. But those addresses don't check out in Shreveport either. I double checked them. I've checked those addresses in a dozen cities. Anything that's possibly connected to Marguerite Oswald, anywhere that she might have possibly been. North Dakota, right? Stanley, North Dakota. Nothing comes up. The only place that those addresses make sense is New York. The only place. Those two addresses in such close proximity, and close proximity to the Waves training facility, which would have been a precursor to Marguerite Oswald being a switchboard or phone operator on a naval base. And so let's put this to rest, because I read a lot of stuff, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. I have a couple things right now that have fallen through the cracks that I'm dying to remember or find in my notes somewhere, because I have some stuff about the Knoll that is driving me up a fucking wall, that I have actual photographs and notes on, and an email when I can't find it. So it's driving me nuts. But back to this. Let's put to rest once and for all whether or not Marguerite Oswald worked for the Navy. I already read this, and I don't know why it didn't go off like an atom bomb at the time. I was probably focusing on a different aspect. But we're going to reread this one page from A Mother in History by Gene Stafford, written with Marguerite Oswald. And Marguerite Oswald says, "But let's go back a little bit, and I'll give you an example of the way things have always worked against me. I used to work in Algiers, Louisiana during the war, and that's across the river from New Orleans. I was a switchboard operator. My duty was 6 o'clock in the morning until 3 or 6:30, I forget which. So I rented a room in Algiers, Louisiana, and my sister was taking care of Lee permanently at this particular time. He was about 2 years old. Every evening I left Algiers and took the ferry and came over and took care of my baby, and would have to leave early enough to get home before dark. After all, I was a woman alone. To be across the river so I could go to work for 6:30. And the naval base personnel used to come with a jeep to pick me up because there was no other way to get to the naval base. Well, this was typical of most of my life. It's a little humorous in a way, but it's typical of things that have happened to me right along. I was on this side of New Orleans, and this young lady that also roomed where I was rooming had a car, and, and that's where this page ends. And so there's a lot going on here. Okay, so when Lee was about 2 years old, okay, so when was Lee about 2 years old? October of 1941. So she's talking about the same time period. We're not talking about when he's 3 years old, because she said he's 2 years old. So that would be closer to early 1942. And this brings into conflict the 831 Pauline Street address, where she is alleged to have lived there from January until June, end of May, early June, because the next lady moved in June 15th. At that address, right, where she lived with the Roaches, Thomas Roach and his wife. But that story seems to have some major, major holes in it. And so this is the time period we're talking about. And here she's saying she worked for the Navy. We also have the Warren Commission testimony of Myrtle Evans, right? Myrtle Evans, who was a longtime friend, admitted she worked for the government at this time, around 1940, 41, 42. And she was friends with Marguerite, and oh shit, it's starting to fall into place. And so, and then she saw the landlord to her in 1954 from basically May to May, 1954 to 1955, right? So Myrtle Evans is a figure in the background that pops up somewhat periodically in Marguerite's life. So let me read this little statement that she made while testifying. Mr. Jenner is asking her how often she saw Marguerite, and Myrtle Evans says, "Well, I wasn't playing cards during that time or anything, but I might have run into her. I imagine I did on the street, but I lost contact with her, sort of, and then it was either just before Lee's birth or just after Lee's birth. I can't remember. It's been so many years." You know, it's so funny. All these people connected to government and Marguerite Oswald, like her sister, they have such horrible memories. They just don't remember anything, right? Was it then? Was it here? Was it now? You know, and then they mix stories and timing of the stories while they're testifying, almost as if it's a trained technique. "I imagine I did on the street, but I lost contact with her, sort of. And then it was either just before Lee's birth or just after his birth. I can't remember. It's been so many years, but I met her on the corner of Canal Street and St. Charles. I think that was after Lee's birth. I think her husband had died, and I think she had just taken the baby to the doctor or something. I think she told me they had wanted to have a little girl, but I can't remember all that just the way it happened, you know. It's been such a long time ago, but I can remember meeting her. I just can't remember, though, if it was after her husband died or if she was expecting a baby or if she was the one who wanted a little girl. I can't remember if it was that was after the child was born. Most likely it was. You see how the testimony is so fluid and back and forth, just like Lillian Moran. Just like Lillian Moran. If she was the one that wanted a little girl, I can't remember if that was after the child was born. Most likely it was that she hoped that she would have a little girl. See, she's mixing concepts in the same sentence. Now, a lot of this was told to me after we became friends again as to what happened. I didn't attend her husband's funeral or anything, and I didn't start seeing a good deal of her again until, let's see, she finally went to work downtown, and I happened to run into her or something like that. She was working for, I think, the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, and I was a widow, and she was a widow, and we, again, sort of regained our friendship. So, what do we have here? During this year of 1942, we have Marguerite Oswald allegedly worked at Bert's shoe store. She, in her own words, the false Marguerite says that she was on the naval base. And Myrtle Evans says that she worked for the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. Do you see why I think that something is afoot here? This gets me thinking. And this is purely me being paranoid and speculating. But the lifelong reconnections between Myrtle Evans and Marguerite Oswald, they go back a long time. They go back to the late 1930s. And at one point during her testimony, Myrtle Evans will say she was with the government then. And she's never pressed on, what do you mean you were with the government then? When you dig into Myrtle Evans, like on, Heritage or Ancestry or whatever, there's nothing, right? And so it's funny because when you can always tell when someone's intelligence, because if you're interested in them, they seem to be intelligent, and then you go dig into their ancestry stuff, there's zip. Zip. Because, like, here's the thing with that ancestry stuff. Everybody has something somewhere. And they're using, like, AI to scan the internet for your name and connecting you to various things. And they have to be doing this because I've seen things with people on there that there's no way they uploaded themselves. And I highly doubt an individual did. Like, when I found the records for Lillian Moret and Marilyn Moret traveling to an Air Force base in Bermuda in 1954, when there really wasn't much naval activity going on there in 1954, and there was no tourism there at this particular location that they went. It really makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder. Was Myrtle Evans working with Marguerite at the naval base? And then this meeting her on the street is a cover story. How often you just meet someone on the street? Very rarely. Bump into them at a restaurant, whatever. Happens pretty rarely. This is a pretty relevant meeting, I would say. So yeah, 1942. I'm totally fucked up over it. And that's what I've been doing with my book. And so, well, shit. I've been talking for 30 minutes now. Too late to start on the document for today, the Garrison Sprague Conference document. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call it here for today. And tomorrow, I promise tomorrow, we will get to the continuation of the Sprague Garrison Bud Fensterwald meeting from 68. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.